Domain 2 is all about risk judgment, and the exam is going to test whether your judgment is calibrated the ISACA way. That means assessing before acting, documenting always, and treating risk to appetite rather than eliminating it entirely. In this video, we work through the scenario types, the traps, and the logic that gets you to the right answer in Domain 2. This is where your risk management thinking gets sharpened. Here are the traps for risk assessment scenarios. Using CVSS scores alone to prioritize AI vulnerabilities. CVSS is a general vulnerability scoring system that doesn't account for AI-specific risk context. It's insufficient on its own. Accepting risk without formal risk owner sign-off. Risk acceptance is a formal governance decision, not an informal one. Treating risk reassessment as an annual event. For AI, reassessment is triggered by material changes, new regulation, model update, data source change. Annual-only reassessment misses these. And always remember, the correct approach is that risk appetite drives treatment choice. You don't eliminate all risk. You treat risk to the level your organization has said it can accept, with the residual documented and owned. Scenario: a new AI model is being deployed that will process customer personal data to make credit decisions. What risk process should be completed before deployment? The answer is a risk assessment, and specifically because personal data is involved in a high-risk decision context, a DPIA is also mandatory. These are not optional. You don't deploy controls first and assess later. The risk assessment tells you which controls are needed. The DPIA tells you whether the privacy risks are acceptable and what additional safeguards are required. For high-risk AI under the EU AI Act, a conformity assessment is also required. The exam will test which assessment applies when: DPIA for GDPR, AIRIA for enterprise risk, AIA for algorithmic fairness, and conformity assessment for EU AI Act compliance. For threat management scenarios, here are the traps. Treating adversarial AI attacks as standard malware. They are not. An evasion attack or a prompt injection requires fundamentally different defenses than a Trojan or ransomware. Ignoring insider threats as a source of AI model compromise. Insiders with access to training data or model deployment pipelines are a significant threat vector. And assuming that because you're using a reputable LLM vendor, prompt injection isn't your risk. Wrong. Prompt injection is a risk for any organization deploying an LLM, regardless of vendor. The control is in how you use the model and what guardrails you put around it, not in which vendor's model you chose. Adversarial AI risk exists regardless of vendor reputation or model quality. For threat management scenarios, here are the traps. Treating adversarial AI attacks as standard malware. They are not. An evasion attack or a prompt injection requires fundamentally different defenses than a Trojan or ransomware. Ignoring insider threats as a source of AI model compromise. Insiders with access to training data or model deployment pipelines are a significant threat vector. And assuming that because you're using a reputable LLM vendor, prompt injection isn't your risk. Wrong. Prompt injection is a risk for any organization deploying an LLM, regardless of vendor. The control is in how you use the model and what guardrails you put around it, not in which vendor's model you chose. Adversarial AI risk exists regardless of vendor reputation or model quality. Scenario: an organization's LLM-based customer service tool starts returning confidential internal business information to external users. Which OWASP LLM risk does this represent? The answer is LLM-06, Sensitive Information Disclosure. The model was trained on data that included confidential information, and it's now disclosing it in responses. If downstream systems then acted on that output without validation, LLM-02, insecure output handling, is also in play. This is a scenario where two OWASP risks are simultaneously present, which is common in real deployments and common in exam questions. The primary risk is LLM06, the sensitive information disclosure. The secondary risk is LLM02, the downstream system's failure to validate the output before acting on it. Read the scenario carefully and identify all risks present, not just the most obvious one. Vendor risk traps in Domain 2. Assuming that a vendor's ISO 27001 certification means all AI-specific risks are managed, ISO 27001 covers information security controls, but it doesn't specifically address AI governance, model transparency, or algorithmic fairness. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition. Treating vendor exit planning as optional until contract termination. Exit planning must be built into the contract from day one. And excluding fourth-party risk from your vendor risk program, if your vendor uses a third-party AI model provider, that provider is part of your risk exposure. Supply chain risk doesn't stop at your direct vendors. The correct approach for AI vendor risk is to explicitly scope the program to include supply chain depth with SBOM tracking as the primary control tool. Scenario: your AI vendor refuses to disclose the sources of the training data used in the model they're providing to you. What should you do? The first step is to treat this as a vendor risk finding and escalate it per your vendor risk policy. Then, evaluate your contractual position. Does your contract include a right to audit that covers training data disclosure? If it does, enforce it. If it doesn't, that's a contract gap that needs to be remediated at renewal or through an amendment. Model transparency is not a courtesy that vendors provide when they feel like it. It's a contractual right that the organization should have negotiated from the start. The exam treats vendor transparency as a governance requirement, not a vendor goodwill gesture. Let me close with a fast recall summary for Domain 2. For 2A, risk assessment, know the 5 AI risk types, the 4 impact assessment types, the risk register structure, risk appetite, and all 4 treatment options: avoid, mitigate, transfer, accept. For 2B, threat and vulnerability management, know the adversarial ML attack types, the OWASP LLM top 10, MITRE Atlas for AI-specific threats, and the vulnerability management program structure. For 2C, vendor risk, know the due diligence framework, the key contract clauses, SPOM for supply chain risk, and the exit planning requirements. The thread that connects all 3 sub-areas is this: assess first, document always, treat to risk appetite level. That sequence, applied consistently, will get you through most Domain 2 scenarios correctly.